So welcome back. My next guest is Keith Camire from the US Census Bureau. Welcome, Keith.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Keith, I'm delighted to have you on. Before we get to the Census Bureau information, I do want to thank you for your service to our country. As I understand it, you're a U.S. Air Force veteran, correct?
That's correct.
4 years in New Mexico?
Yes, sir.
Great. So we'll have to have you back at some future time for our veteran segment. But you're here today to talk about the U.S. Census Bureau and the U.S. Census that's coming up, just next year. So why do people respond to the U.S. Census? Why do we have it?
Well, the census has been around since 1790. This is the 24th census that we're conducting on a 10-year basis. So every 10 years ending in 0, we want to count all the citizens of the United States and all the residents, people that live here. You have currently over 330 million people in over 140 million households. It's a lot of people.
Right.
And so what happens is there's two key components in addition to a variety of other aspects, but the main dynamic is fiscal, financial ability from the federal government to be able to support the states. Mm-hmm. For the next 10 years, there's going to be $675 billion allocated back to the states from the federal government on an annual basis.
Wow.
And so we're talking about a large portion of funding to be able to support over 100 different programs that are pretty much run by every one of the states that help in all different facets of our society in order to be able to help infrastructure, education, medical, different things like that. People have needs, and this is for 10 years of time. So that data is crucial for 10 years based off of one day in history. The second aspect is about, as you're familiar, being the elected official for the town, is the nature of districting. Right? So you have districting for schools, districting for elected officials. And so what happens is then we have to be able to ensure that we're able to have a number of people that our legislators and elected officials are representing. They want to represent people, not land.
Right.
Right? And so at the end of the day, we have to ensure that we're providing proper financial support to our communities, the infrastructure and different things of that nature, and then also to ensure that we're being represented properly. Another key aspect is that this census impacts over 130 other surveys that the Census Bureau does. So it's not just one census or survey that we do. We're strictly statistics. And so there's over 130 surveys that are all impacted by the census.
Right. Now, and you hit on a whole bunch of key points. So it's really appropriations, it's funding, and making sure that that's allocated, in a proportional basis based upon population, and really just representation. On the federal level, we have the U.S. Senate. Every state has 2 senators, but we have the House of Representatives, and that's population driven. And that's the whole basis behind the Electoral College, where we have our designated representatives and how they're designated per state and how that shifts and fluctuates. As a kid growing up, New York was like the most populous state. And we were either number 1 or number 2 in terms of electoral votes. And as other areas of the country have kind of grown in population, that's kind of shifted.
Correct.
And it's based every 10 years on what the census kind of determines.
Correct. And you bring up a great point. In the last year alone, New York has lost over 68,000 people to Florida, to just a one state.
Right.
In that same last 10-year period of time, we've lost over 1 million residents to Florida.
Right.
So people are moving, people are transitioning in their lives to different places, and as of right now, we're slated to lose 1, possibly 2 congressional seats for New York alone. So it's a big deal when it comes down to making sure we have the right representation and the funding associated.
Right. So the census itself, and we'll kind of get into that. Some of the questions that'll be on the census, and then also, what's kind of the workflow, the pattern that people will kind of see going forward with the census in 2020. So, but when the census is complete, then those numbers will be, kind of finalized, captured for that moment in time, and that will become the basis for what the actual population is according to the census at a moment in time, which then is accepted by the federal government and then becomes the basis for the redistricting, correct?
Correct. April 1st. April 1st is the day. December 31st is the deadline that has to be in the president's hand. And then following next couple of months, you'll see that it then becomes finalized in the sense of redistricting.
Right. Right. So what are some of the things, or what will be on the census?
So one of the biggest concerns is the nature of privacy. Okay. The census has what's called Title 13. Title 13 was put in place to be able to protect our personal privacy. According to Title 13, you and I and everybody else's personal information cannot be shared with anyone under any circumstance, not even the Supreme Court, the President, Congress, doesn't matter who it is. There is no legal reason to be able to provide personal information and no allocation for it. So what happens is then your personal data from a personal perspective is captured by the census and retained for 72 years, and it cannot be released under any circumstances. Now the thing is when it comes to the privacy piece, is a lot of people are concerned, okay, well what are the census going to be asking? Okay, things that we'll be asking are statistics. We are a statistical based organization, so all we care about is actual numbers, to be able to look into an area, into a community and see, okay, 20% of the population is this, 15% of the population is this age. And all we care about is what the actual numbers are. So your personal data is not shared in that regard. The information that we do want to capture are things like your age, your race, your gender, your date of birth. We will never ask for your banking information or credit card information. We will never ask for anything financial or financial support. And we will never ask anything from a political standpoint. And we don't ask for an entire Social Security number.
Right.
So the idea is that fraud is a concern, right? How do we ensure that there's no fraud? We have a massive cybersecurity program that's in place to be able to ensure when information is captured by the census, it is retained and protected behind firewalls. They're constantly being encrypted and not accessible to the outside.
Right.
And then we do not ask for those personal identifiers that would be something that could compromise your identity in that regard either.
Right. So there's an awful lot of work that's leading up to the 2020 census now, right? So how does the Census Bureau kind of scale up to get themselves prepared and ready? You know, because as you indicated earlier, it's the count around April 1st.
Correct.
So that's really kind of your scaling up to that. So how, you know, what are some of the efforts that have been taking place so far to kind of prepare for the census?
Well, it is a massive project. It is the largest civilian-based effort from the federal government standpoint that we have, right? So there are over, I think, 300,000 employees that are going to be involved in the entire census for 2020. The census, like I said, does conduct over 130 other surveys. So there is a base staff and group of individuals that are constantly employed by the census. But throughout the entirety of the decennial census, we have to do a massive ramp up of staffing. We are currently hiring throughout the area. We are still seeking thousands of people to be able to help support this census in itself, the count. If anybody's interested in the jobs, they could go to 2020census.gov/jobs. So it's 2020census.gov/jobs. And we are doing a ramp up. And right now, part of my role as a partnership specialist is to be a messenger, to be able to partner with the communities, organizations, the municipalities throughout Rockland County to ensure that we are representing our people properly, because we all have to share the load of helping make sure we get a proper count. So my role is to ensure that we are working together. There are other individuals throughout the entire country doing the same thing, and we even have specialists like myself who speak certain languages or have different cultural dynamics. For instance, I have a partner who's born in Haiti, and he comes up here, meets with our Haitian community as needed. I have an individual who's part of the Yiddish community. He can come up here and engage in those cultural dynamics in ways. So we have a massive effort that's underway right now.
Right. And so how can someone ultimately respond to the census starting next year?
All right, so this is the very first time that the census will be available in an electronic format. So clearly there's a technology piece that's of a concern regarding the security, and that's why I referenced it earlier. Now, so what will happen is people can go to the same website, 2020census.gov, so 2020census.gov, and they will then be invited to participate in the census electronically. This will be done on your personal laptop, a desktop computer, an iPhone, a tablet, something of those different devices where somebody can access them. The other option is the traditional mail, hand manual version. That will be also made available to people. And what's great is that we also have the ability through translators and also English to do it over the phone. So individuals with disabilities or language restrictions, they'll be able to access it over the phone, and there'll be people who can help translate it and do it over the phone for them. And then finally, it's an in-person So in 2010, I worked on the census, and I was going door to door. I was collecting data and information from people who either didn't respond, the information was incomplete or inaccurate. And so I was going through, following up, making sure that we had accurate data going to different residences. And so those are the 4 primary modes by which we can do the census.
Wow. And so when will people start seeing an outreach from the Census Bureau?
Well, there's my role that's ongoing right now, which is awareness and partnership. But then when it comes to a greater effort, you're going to start seeing advertising starting in January. And then what will happen is you'll start seeing things in the mail, you'll see things in the newspapers and all different forms of traditional media and the internet where people get marketing and sharing of the information. You'll start seeing the news stories ramp up and cycling through. And then ultimately at the end of the day, March is when you're going to start seeing the massive push to try and get people to fulfill the census, and you'll be able to actually do the census online in March. And then the main day is April 1st, having everybody counted by where they live on April 1st.
Right. And you know, it's interesting, for those of us that, and some of our viewers who may go on things like Ancestry.com and what have you, to actually see some of the old pictures or you know, the data that's been collected on prior census, you know, to see who lived where at what point, you know, in time, you know, every 10 years. So it's, our country goes through it every 10 years. It's integral to how we proportionalize our representation and how funding is driven. So it's very important for us in New York and here in Clarkstown and Rockland County to make sure that everybody's counted. So where can people learn more about the census?
The same website, 2020census.gov, and then they can also go to census.gov.
Right.
Census.gov is our main website that'll be up indefinitely, and then the 2020census.gov is specific to the upcoming decennial census. And there's tons of resources there as well on the main website that I was pretty impressed by when it comes to a lot of different businesses or nonprofits or even municipalities who have resources that they need to get information for. They can go to that website and gain so much information. We have a great education portal too, where people can go on to the 2020census.gov, and there is an education portal so that even K through 12 can implement the information into their curriculum. And that's an ongoing effort that'll be available as well. And it's a really dynamic, the amount of resources there. Another thing is, we also have social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, and there's a plethora of data and ongoing information and communication that's made available. And so we encourage people to go, follow, share, like on all those different areas. Great.
Well, Keith, I want to thank you for being such a great guest. Again, the link, if folks are interested, because I understand these are jobs that typically pay
$18 an hour here in Rockland. In Westchester, I believe it's 21. That's the starting. There are other jobs that when you go into the website for basic enumerator, the basic enumerator job, it starts at $18 an hour. And then if you're traveling, because part of the job is to travel, you get 58 cents a mile reimbursement. Now, beyond that, there are a couple of different supervisory administrative jobs. The rate may be a little bit different as you get into those roles if you're accepted for them. The only requirement is age 18 and a U.S. citizen. We do not discourage anybody from applying.
Great. So folks should go on to that. If they're interested, they go to 2020.gov/jobs?
2020 Census.
2020 Census.gov. Census.gov.
Correct.
And /jobs. Well, Keith, thanks so much for being such a great guest and giving us so much information about the census. And we wish you well as this project continues to unfold. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be right back. Stay tuned.